Good evening. My name is Brother Dave Gillarm, and this is the Prince Hall Think Tank. I'm a past master of Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Brandon Dura serves as our worship master. I also have the pleasure of serving as a worship grand historian for the most worship Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Georgia, where the Honorable Corey Shackelford Sr. serves as our 18th most worship grand master. Um, I'll be your host for the night. Unfortunately, Brother Antonio Caffey and Brother James Morgan couldn't be on tonight. They were still kind of devastated at the loss that the Knicks face against the Hawks. So they were just so distraught that they could not come on tonight. And I told them that I will still carry on the torch for them. That's just what I do. That's the type of person I am. So tonight we're gonna have we also have Brother Damian Jack, who could be with us, who's carrying the torch as well, and we have our special guest, the Right Worshipful Grand Junior Warden Timothy Johnson for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge, New Mexico. As always, the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the lodges and grand lodges in which we hold membership. So now I'm passing on to Brother Damian Jack so he introduce himself.
Thank you. I just had to get my thoughts together. Good evening, everyone. Brother Damian Jack, proud past master of Paul Drayton Lodge number 7, Charlotte, North Carolina, where Brother Sean Moy serves as our worshipful master. Our lodge is a constituent lodge under the auspices of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge, free and accepted Masons jurisdiction of North Carolina, where the Honorable Daniel L. D.T. Thompson serves as our 24th most worshipful Grand Master. It is an honor and pleasure to be with you this evening. Pray that you enjoy the show and the topic that we have for you this evening. And as always, you could have been doing anything else, but we thank you for taking your time out to spend the evening with us.
All right, now, brother Timothy, can you introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Past Master Timothy Johnson. I hail from Mount Everest Lodge number 1, free and accepted Masons under the jurisdiction of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Mexico, presided over by Right Worshipful Deputy Grand Master Charles Norman.
Uh, all right, thank you for that, Brother Tim. Tonight's show, we're going to talk about history of Prince Hall Masonry in the great state of New Mexico. Usually, when we talk about Prince Hall Masonry, we always think about those jurisdictions such as Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Ohio. So some of the ones that helped start or help spread Prince Hall Masonry throughout the United States and essentially throughout the world. But now we're going to kind of focus on those areas that also have a great history as well, and that being New Mexico. So let's go ahead and pass it over to Right Worshipful Johnson and let him tell us about the history of Prince Hall Masonry in New Mexico.
Thank you, Brother Gillarm. Thank you. Let me share my screen here. Let me get this up here. Just bear with me 1 second here as I get this screen up. You able to see my screen correctly there, brothers? Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, sir. We got you.
Okay, got you. Just making sure. So once again, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here to share what little bit I do know about the Prince Hall Masonic era here in the great state of New Mexico. First, let me give a shout out and say that this is our 100th year. We are a very young jurisdiction, but September 21st of this year will be our 100th consecutive year in operation as a Grand Lodge within this state. I'm going to start with the history predating the formation of this Grand Lodge because it plays a pretty big role in Masonry around the Southwest here. The first lodge that was instituted that I have found record of was instituted here in 1890 by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado. and that lodge was Montezuma Lodge number 8. If you know anything about geographical history here, New Mexico did not even become a state of the Union until 1912. So that lodge being chartered here was during the time that New Mexico was considered a territory. Over the next 18 years, Colorado would go on to institute and charter 7 lodges total. True to the nature of being the Southwest, or the Wild Wild West, as some like to call it back then, you not only had Colorado with lodges here, you had some military lodges that were chartered here under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri, one being in a clip that Past Master Dave did yesterday, where he talked about Past Master Cecil Slade. We won't get too in-depth into the history of that. That'll be another project that Dave and I so curiously will be working out on in the future because of some things that we did find out. But there were 2 lodges that Missouri had here, and they both were military lodges. That Tyree 143 in Columbus, New Mexico, which was attached to the 24th Regiment, Buffalo Soldiers. And then they also had one that was stationed at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. And that one was actually back in 1898, and it was attached to the 9th Cavalry, which was also a Buffalo Soldiers unit. And they lasted in Fort Wingate for about 3 years and then moved on to Wyoming, where they set up camp there. So you had those 2 military lodges. Colorado also had a military lodge that was instituted and chartered down in Columbus as well, which is why Past Master and I are going to be doing some history on that, because we found something unique that 2 lodges were chartered in the same place in the same year. And if you know anything about New Mexico, Columbus is not a big place. So I'm curious to figure out as to why 2 lodges were chartered there by 2 different jurisdictions. Moving along, as you had those, that lodge in Fort Wingate was Advantage Military Lodge number 136. That pretty much gives you much of the history prior to the formation of this Grand Lodge. One other event that happened prior to the formation of this Grand Lodge, a little clicker went off on me. There goes those. Y'all jinxed me there, Past Master. You said there wasn't going to be no technical difficulties on here. Here goes the first one. There we go. All right. Prior to New Mexico becoming a Grand Lodge in 1921, in 1903, a brother by the name of J.H.C. Red, he was a deputy Grand Master under Colorado for Arizona. And in that same year, during their grand session, he was actually elected as the Grand Junior Warden of Colorado. Here's the unique thing that happened. After he was elected Grand Junior Warden, he decided to call a convention of lodges together in August of that year. And they all met in Tucson, August 26th and 27th of 1903. And he called those lodges together because at that time he thought of this bright idea that he was going to start a Grand Lodge in New Mexico and break away from Colorado. Unfortunately, the lodges didn't vote that way, and they never formed a Grand Lodge in 1903. Subsequently, it caused JHC read to be suspended from the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado for a year. He was reinstated back in August of 1904. He was reinstated, but he never got back in line, as far as I know, in the Grand Line. So I just thought that was unique that some years prior, 18 years to be exact, they did try to form a Grand Lodge, and it wasn't successful. So the first elected Grand Lodge officers here in New Mexico, I kind of love our date because it's actually my birthday, so I can never forget it. So September 21st of 1921 is when the Grand Lodge of New Mexico was organized. Much like many of the early Grand Lodges, we lost, I want to say, 15 to 20 years of our records due to a fire. So a lot of the information that I had to compile in those first 20 years came from networking with people like Past Master Gillarm, Brother Morgan, Brother Curtis Black out of Texas, and a whole bunch of other ones that we've all over the years have passed information along with each other. One thing I can say about this jurisdiction and many others back then, they were very good about publishing things in the newspapers and different journals and things of that nature. So as you start to research, it was easy for me to go and start finding these bits and pieces and putting them together. So on September 22nd, 1921, I found a article from the Albuquerque Journal that lists the election and the outcome of it and the lodges that were present during that time. And our first Grand Master that was elected was TBJ Barclay. I wish Brother Morgan was on here and some of the other individuals, but he's a unique individual. He was a circuit rider for the AME Church. I've traced this man with the AME stuff all over Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, setting up churches all along that way. A couple of things that stood out for me. I don't think this man ever took a picture in history. I find his name, no picture. And that's even for the AME Church. And if you know anything about their conclaves, they usually have pictures of the different bishops and ministers and whatnot. His is just a name, blank spot, no picture. Also, one of the things that was unique about him was, even though I have him listed and we find it here, I could never find anything in the minutes in any of our lodges or anything of him being raised in New Mexico. And it was something that was driving me crazy to try and figure it out. We even had a group of us one time that sat, myself, Brother Morgan, and some of the sisters, and we were all online one day, and we spent 30 to 45 minutes, every one of us, using our resources, trying to figure out or find a picture of him, and we didn't. So I'm sitting one day, me and Brother Black are sitting, and I'm talking to him, and I'm doing some history on my great-great-grandfather, who was a Mason in Texas. And if you look at the picture on the right, he sends me the picture of him after we get it, and his name is G.W. Turkneck there, and we're looking at the lodge, and I'm putting my family history together. And then, lo and behold, not even looking for it, we hadn't even had this conversation. The very next lodge listed below, which was Rector Lodge number 277, under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. But they had a lodge chartered in Roswell, New Mexico. And as I'm reading going through it, because I only knew about Sanhedrin Lodge in Albuquerque that was under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. So as I'm reading and I get down to the very last line, I see two unique names for me because I've been trying to find their affiliation prior to New Mexico for both. One being TBJ Barclay, who was our first Grand Master. So now I can piece together what jurisdiction he belonged to and was raised in. The second name is Francis Boyer, and we'll get into that name a little bit later, but it was kind of trippy for me in how the world and the universe aligns with itself that I ran into this information that we've been looking for years, and not looking for it is how I actually found it. So that was something good. The other officers were the Deputy Grand Master K.R. Connors. And let me put an asterisk by that because I said the first elected officers. But back then, during that time, the Deputy Grand Master was not an appointed position. I mean, not an elected position. It was an appointed position. And that made sense to me later on as I started doing the research for my jurisdiction. And I think that it was even prevalent in some of the other jurisdictions as well. A pattern I noticed that started to develop was the Deputy Grand Master was not always ascending to the next seat. It was the senior warden a lot of times. And I got to talking to some of the elders in the jurisdiction and come to find out Deputy Grand Master was an appointed position. That's why you didn't see him ascend automatically to the seat of the Grand Master. The other ones, K.R. Connors is also unique. I won't go very in depth on him, but he was a train porter, and he was instrumental working on the Santa Fe rail line here. And he was instrumental in helping file the lawsuit for equal pay amongst the train porters here in the Albuquerque area. And he filed that federal case in Tucson during one of his trips on the train as he was working with 9 other individuals. So if you ever want to do some research on that, his name is K.R. Connors, and actual full name is King R. Connors, out of Albuquerque. The Grand Senior Warden was J.C. Spurlock. Remember that name, J.C. Spurlock. And for those of you who are members of the Colorado jurisdiction, if you've done any history, that name should really ring a bell for you. And then Grand Junior Warden, of course, was Wallace Castle out of Gallup, and so on with the other ones there. So the formation of this Grand Lodge caused some serious tension between the jurisdiction of New Mexico and the jurisdiction of Colorado. These two lodges here in particular, one being in Raton, R.K. Felton Lodge number 23, and the other one, Sunlight Lodge number 22 in Gallup, New Mexico. I'm going to start with R.K. Felton, just get to the fat meat right away. At that time, when the convention was called to formulate this Grand Lodge here in New Mexico, J.C. Spurlock was the worshipful master of R.K. Felton Lodge number 23 in Raton, New Mexico, under Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Colorado. Well, reading through minutes and different letters and stuff that were written back and forth between the two jurisdictions, what happened was, as worshipful master, this brother took the charter without the members of his lodge knowledge showed up at the convention with the charter, turned it in, became part of one of the lodges that formulated this jurisdiction, and then got elected as Grand Senior Warden. That was problem number one. I could understand why the jurisdiction of Colorado would have been upset. Although he was the worst Freemason, he was in charge of it. Not one time did he present this to his lodge or the Grand Lodge and tell them of his plans. Sunlight Lodge number 22 in Gallup, New Mexico, kind of the same thing. Colorado felt like their charter got hijacked, and it too went to the convention and was part of the lodges that formulated this jurisdiction. So it put a bitter taste in Colorado's for New Mexico. Quite naturally, they felt like they were being slighted when it came to those particular lodges. And on the other hand, you had two lodges from Texas that were there, the one in Roswell, Rector Lodge, and then you also had Sanhedrin Lodge in Albuquerque, who had just gotten instituted, I want to say about 6 or 7 months prior to that session being held. So there was a lot of things going on back then when it came to New Mexico, and it actually caused a rift between New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas at that time. The Grand Master that was serving at that time was past Grand Master Professor Wynn. And it caused some tension for about a 16-year period, from 1921 to 1937. This beef went on between New Mexico and Colorado. I think it was resolved a little bit sooner between Colorado and Texas, but it went on for 16 years between New Mexico and Colorado, to the tune of Colorado just did not recognize New Mexico. And in 1923, they actually still held their grand session here in Albuquerque because they did not view New Mexico at that time as a jurisdiction. And that was in 1923. This next guy here, as we're going chronologically along here, this is probably my favorite Grandmaster when I'm doing history and we're talking about the jurisdiction of New Mexico. This was a bad man right here. First off, he fought in the Spanish-American War. He fought in World War I. He was a lieutenant. He was an officer. He could read and write well. He spoke well. He's very charismatic. And he took us through some very pivotal points in history when we talk about it here in New Mexico. Marion C. Roden was elected Grand Master in 1933. And from day one of him being elected in 1933, as I'm looking at letters, and by the way, he and John Lewis Jr., past Grand Master of Louisiana, were good friends. I've read countless letters between the two of them corresponding back and forth on situations and how to handle it. And it's really, really interesting looking at the intercourse that they had with each other. I think for a period there, they were writing each other at least once a month, at minimum, talking about masonry and different issues and how to approach them and handle them and whatnot. But the first thing he did coming into office was he wanted to resolve the issue between New Mexico and Colorado, and he set out to do it. And in his fourth year, he was able, with the help of the Conference of Grand Masters, have an arbitrary board put together that would attend the grand session, which was August 18th, 1937 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And that board, as you can read there, it consisted of a Grand Master from Nebraska, a past Grand Master from Kansas, Deputy Grand Master from Arizona, and the Deputy Grand Master from Colorado. And they all sat down for a 2-day period, and they were able to voice their concerns, their gripes, their opinions, and what Colorado felt was done wrong, what New Mexico felt they were doing right. And at the end of the day, they were able to squash the beef that they had. New Mexico was now being recognized by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge after this arbitrary board meeting there. So a 16-year conflict ended between those two jurisdictions. All was forgiven. Now, a couple of things transpired after this particular meeting. Mind you, I said that everything was okay on the front between the two jurisdictions. Past Grandmaster Roten wanted to keep peace and harmony prevailing between the two. So there was about a group of 10 men that lived here in Albuquerque who still wanted to hold their allegiance to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado. They did not want to join the jurisdiction of New Mexico. And per his own letter he wrote to Colorado at that time, in 1938, he did something unique. To keep these brothers in Masonry, he wrote a special permit so that the lodge that was here, or used to be here when Colorado instituted, which is Eureka Lodge number 19 at that time, he wrote a special permit for Eureka Lodge number 19 to still exist in the state of New Mexico, but still be under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado with these stipulations. Those 10 men could meet, be recognized as a legitimate lodge, still converse with the jurisdiction of New Mexico and Colorado, but they could not reinstate any old members. They could not raise any new Master Masons. They could only operate until those 10 members died off. And it actually lasted for 20 years. The last time it was on the rolls and operational in Colorado's minutes was a grand session of 1957. So those 10 brothers operated for another 10 years, meeting and happy. I thought that was kind of unique. I don't think I've ever heard that in any other jurisdiction. If it is, turn me on to it. But I thought that was something that was very unique because I had never heard it done before, especially back then. But he wanted to keep peace and harmony between the two jurisdictions. The second thing that happened with this was, like anything, you're not going to please everybody. So there was still a group of, mind you, legitimate brothers that were still not happy with the outcome of the arbitrary meeting that took place at that grand section in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So sometime in the beginning of 1938, they set out and formed their own Grand Lodge. And that Grand Lodge was called King Solomon's Grand Lodge, AF and AM of New Mexico Colored Masons. This now started a whole new issue for past Grandmaster Roten, because you had them trying to circumvent, just like any clandestine Grand Lodge. You had them in the ears of a lot of other people, especially new ones that didn't know any better. And they started to grow pretty fast. They were soliciting membership, in other words. So this caused a thorn, and Past Grandmaster Roden, being the man that he is, over some period of time, he actually got King Solomon's Grand Lodge to come to the table, and he's like, look, we can't operate like this. And they sat down. I don't know what it was, about 2 days, but it seemed like 2 days was every meeting back then. After 2 days, the two jurisdictions came to a conclusion, and the majority of the members from the King Solomon's Grand Lodge, we're talking about in 1949 right now, 12 years later, the majority of the members of King Solomon's Grand Lodge were perfectly okay with merging with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in New Mexico. Here's where egos come in at. Everything was fine and dandy behind the closed doors, and they get back out to the table in front of all of the memberships from both jurisdictions. And the Grand Master from the King Solomon's Grand Lodge, out of nowhere, puts a stipulation on him signing over and this merger happening. And he stands up and he says, if I do this, I have to be appointed Grand Master. And Marion C. Roden says, no, you cannot be appointed Grand Master. We are here. We're going to have a grand session, and we will have elections, and whomever is elected. But because he was not assured he was going to be appointed Grand Master if he had the merger, it did not happen. It did not happen. So once again, we're back in our own separate corners, figuring out what to do next. Well, from that point moving forward, Marion C. Roden, Past Grand Master, he didn't even go back and approach him anymore. He just went straight to the courts, filed the case, won the case in the lower district courts. King Solomon's Grand Lodge, they appealed and appealed and appealed and appealed all the way up to the federal level. And they got to the federal courts, and I thought something else that was very unique. When you read the lawsuit, you can look it up as well. It's New Mexico, Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge in New Mexico versus King Solomon Grand Lodge, AF and AM, 1957. One of the things I thought was very unique was only one witness was called, at least from Prince Hall Grand Lodge in New Mexico. And that one witness was Marion C. Roden. And they interviewed him. He went through, said everything that he did. And then the court made a ruling, ultimately upholding the lower court's decision that the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge in New Mexico was the supreme authority among Masons here in New Mexico, and King Solomon's Grand Lodge had to cease and desist immediately or face criminal charges. So that did happen, and you had a lot of that membership that ended up joining the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Mexico because they had nowhere else to go. So he was very, very pivotal in some very important things that transpired here in New Mexico. And I love just reading about the things he did and the letters that he would write back and forth between him and John Lewis Jr. Out of Louisiana, and some of the, he was good friends with the Grand Master in New York, and just looking at the way that they conversed back then with each other. These jurisdictions were very, very transparent. And another thing I have to bring up is the King Solomon's Grand Lodge went on a campaign for a period of time there where they were sending correspondence to all of the other Prince Hall jurisdictions at that time, even to the tune of writing to the Conference of Grand Masters. Now, I don't have it on the screen here, but if anybody ever wanted it, you can just email me, or you know how to get in touch with me. He wrote a letter, and I was talking to Past Master Gillarm about this early. He reminded me so much of Past Grandmaster Dobbs. He writes a letter to the Conference of Grand Masters, and he kind of scolds everybody and tells them, you know who we are, and this is a spurious group of Masons. And if you entertain anything they are requesting, so be it, we'll deal with it after that. But it was the verbiage in the letter, like he was a feisty old man, and he did not play, and he didn't play with his words. He didn't pull back, and he let them know there's nothing that you should entertain from this group of Masons. So I thought that was another interesting thing that I ran across, a letter that he wrote to the Conference of Grand Masters. Another unique thing that happened for this jurisdiction was back on November 16th, 1996. At that time, our sitting Grand Master was past Grand Master Harold Bendall. And we were the 15th state to sign a compact with the AF and AM, giving each other mutual recognition. One of the interesting things about our compact with the Grand Lodge of New Mexico was there's some very specific verbiage that is written in there. Part of it being, of course, we have full recognition and visitation rights amongst the two jurisdictions. Of course, they both stay sovereign and govern each other legislative wise, yada, yada, hold 9 yards. No one loses their sovereignty. But one of the things that I read that was unique in the compacts, one of the articles states that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Mexico would not only enter into this compact with the Grand Lodge of New Mexico, but we would also recognize any other grand jurisdiction that they recognized. And that verbiage was also vice versa. Grand Lodge of New Mexico would recognize anybody that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Mexico recognized. So I thought that was unique because I've heard of a couple of other jurisdictions that have done that, but it's very few that have verbiage attached to their compacts in that manner. Hold on, let me get something here. Moving to things. Okay. So, 1996, they met at the Scottish Rite Hall up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there were 250 plus Master Masons in attendance from both jurisdictions that filled the hall for that signing. I'll cover some of our notable individuals, not all, but just some to stick out. Past Grand Master Alex Smith was elected as our 19th Grand Master of this jurisdiction here. I brought him up not only because he currently serves as the president of the Phylaxis Society, but Past Grand Master Alex Smith and I worked together very closely with gathering this information for the history of New Mexico, to the tune of one time I needed some information and he happened to be near Tulane University on vacation with his wife, and I could only get it in person. So I called him up, him being the person he is. I say, hey, Past Grand, I need some information from Amistad Research, and you right there by it can swing the RV through the parking lot and pick up the information for me. And he never even said why second guess me or anything. I just look up a couple of hours later and he's like, hey, Tim, I sent you the information that you needed. But he's been very dedicated, just like I have with this history stuff, not just locally, but on a national level as well. The next three individuals that I am bringing up, I think is unique because they all are part of this jurisdiction, but all hold seats in the Phylaxis Society currently. Next one is Past Grandmaster Harold Bendall, who was elected as our 16th Grandmaster of this jurisdiction. He currently serves as the treasurer of the Phylaxis Society, as well as sitting on the audit committee for the shrine as well. Next one is Past Grandmaster Jesse Watkins. He was elected as our 14th Grandmaster here, and he also serves as the financial secretary of the Phylaxis Society. So all three of those past Grandmasters are continuously serving on a national level as well here locally, because they all still have different roles that they play here in our jurisdictions as well, and have been doing so long after they came out of their seats. They didn't become past Grandmasters and sit in the pews and became the Junior Eight-Man Corner. They're actually still actively working in this jurisdiction and nationally. This guy here is one, if you are going to bring up and do any type of history, not just Masonic history, Black history. I discovered this later doing some research and figured out that he actually belonged to our jurisdiction at the time of his death. He actually served as our grand lecturer for a 4-year period time between, I want to say between 1929 and 1933, he served as our grand lecturer. But this guy's name is Francis Frank Boyer. Francis Frank Boyer was born in Pelham, Georgia. Graduated from 2 colleges, one being Fisk University. Very educated man. Frank is very instrumental. If you've done any history on a town called Blackton, New Mexico, Frank, with 2 of his students, walked all the way from Georgia after witnessing a lynching, walked all the way from Georgia to Roswell, New Mexico, and where they eventually ended up founding a town called Blackton. And Blackton went on for about 20 plus years. He got here in New Mexico, I believe it was around 1899, 1900. But they started an all-Black town. Black church, Black school, Black everything, Black businesses, kind of like something what we're talking about or learning about over Black Wall Street right now. But it was just in Roswell, New Mexico. In 1921, a bad drought hit, and most of the members of the town began to disperse in other places in New Mexico. And Frank and his family and some of the other individuals in Blackton migrated down to an area now known as Vado, New Mexico, which is where his grave is, where you see this tombstone here. Vado, New Mexico. He also founded Vado, which is still in operation to this day. The original schoolhouse that he and his wife started up for the children there still exists, although right now it's utilized as a head start, but it is a federal national landmark for that town down there. And I did have the opportunity to visit and take pictures of that original building that is still standing. But Frank was an innovator. His first crack at starting a town wasn't Blackton, New Mexico. He attempted to do this in Florida as well as Georgia. And if you look up his history, there were two towns that he went to institute in Florida as well. But again, how he ended up in New Mexico ties right back into what we were talking about with the military lodges. Prior to him coming here, Frank's father was in the military. He would deliver supplies to the different companies. And Frank's father was down in the Columbus, New Mexico area, that Vado area, all down there when he was in the military. So when his son and some of them witnessed the lynching that happened in Georgia, in Pelham, his father told him, "You need to get out of here, and I want you to go west, where I told you you can thrive and flourish without any racial tension." So that's exactly what he did. He came out here and never looked back. And there are a lot of things here as far as New Mexico history that he plays a big part in. This is my man here, Past Grandmaster Jesse Waddles, or Honorary Past Grandmaster Jesse Waddles. This is the man who actually signed my petition when I first came into Masonry. Jesse Waddles was raised as a Master Mason in 1942, and he continuously served up until his death in 2019, 70 plus consecutive years that he served as a Master Mason in this jurisdiction. And to tell you something about his character, he was 96 years old when he passed away, and he still worked in the Albuquerque International Airport, pushing elderly people around in a wheelchair from the gates to the doors and to their cars. And he was 96. Many of the people he transported around the airport used to look back at him and be like, "You're older than I am." And he absolutely was. But that's a work ethic that he had in him, which also put him in the position of being the first Black millionaire in New Mexico, self-made, way back in 1975. And last but not least, just another notable person, Honorable James B. Lewis. 33rd, he was elected as Treasurer of New Mexico on 2 different times. He's also served as the Chief Operating Officer of the city of Albuquerque, and he also worked directly under Bill Richardson in the Bill Clinton era in the Department of Energy. Outside of that, I don't have much more. I didn't want to take up all the time here tonight. I hope you learned a little bit about New Mexico, but if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me any questions that you may have at this time. I am all ears.
Thank you for that, Right Worshipful Johnson. That was very, very, very informative. I see you got some good commentary behind the presentation. New Mexico definitely has some very interesting history, which I'm pretty sure we're going to ask quite a few questions. And to do that, it'll be Brother Damien Jack.
Outstanding presentation, Right Worshipful Johnson. Not just to learn about the jurisdiction as well, but basically what the jurisdiction had to go through just to be recognized as, as a jurisdiction. I mean, to go through that period of 16 years and go through the back and forth between New Mexico and Colorado, in doing the history and learning the history about the jurisdiction. And let me just say happy centennial to you and the brothers of New Mexico. What would you say overall, if you had to pick a favorite topic subject person, brother. When you look at the 100-year history of the jurisdiction, what would you pull out to be as your favorite?
Um, Probably would be, like I said, dealing with past Grandmaster Roden, and him being the example of what we should be as Masons. And what I mean by that is he recognized a couple of wrongs and sought out to fix them, and correct some things that did happen. And I think had he not done that, I don't know if that issue would have been resolved after 16 years. But he set out and humbled himself, reached out to that jurisdiction, and did not stop until it was resolved. So just the perseverance of that past Grand Master, and then looking at him as an example, like I talk about those other three Grand Masters, he didn't come out of the seat and just sit down. He continued to be a working force, even though he was not in that leadership chair anymore. Um, when we had the lawsuit and the thing with King Solomon Grand Lodge, he was no longer Grand Master, but he saw through it to finish something that he started. And John G. Lewis and him worked together to get that issue resolved.
Amazing. I think the one topic that Brother Gillarm, Brothers Morgan and Caffey talked about briefly during our last show is when you look up the history of not just of the jurisdictions, but of brothers, whether they have been past Grand Masters or just notable brothers, you notice the amount of things that they were involved in outside of Masonry. So when you was talking in the beginning of the history, and you was talking about one particular brother, I forget his name, please forgive me, who had the connection with the AME Church, and he was establishing churches all over, and it kind of reminds me of my first past Grand Master, Bishop James Walker Hood, when he came into North Carolina and established over 300 churches, and did certain things outside of that. And so it makes you sit there and wonder, like, wow, how is it these brothers had so much energy to do things out on top of what they were doing for Masonry, but as far as their home life, as far as their professional life, what they sought to may have been their hobbies, and they were able to utilize and put all of these things together, and you look at a culmination of their legacy, and you just sit there and be like, wow, it's amazing, so many things that these brothers were able to accomplish, and just by some of the things that you talked about, as far as New Mexico, and past Grandmaster Roden, and him able to reach out to past Grandmasters in different jurisdictions on basically the conquest that he was on, and the legacy that he wanted to leave. And even though you may have not have talked about what he did personally, I could only imagine some of the things he would have done outside of Masonry and in his personal life, and things like that. So it always amazes me, historically, how these brothers were so well-rounded that they could still keep their personal life and do the things that they needed to do, and then handle the business of Masonry. So I always found that to be outstanding.
One of the things, like you just hitting on there, just past Grandmaster Roden, TBJ Barclay, all of those guys had big personal lives, like you said, outside of that. And as I start to research them, like Roden, he was president of the Veterans of the Spanish American War, which I know took a lot of his time with travel and still trying to incorporate masonry, and this is all during the time that he's Grand Master as well. So I can say that those brothers back then really utilized that 24-inch gauge to the fullest. TBJ Barclay, our first Grand Master, that's who you were referring to there. I truly believed he only served as Grand Master for 2 years because he was always traveling. The past Grand Master also owned a barbershop. Now, between masonry, traveling, and setting up churches, I don't know how he had time to cut nobody's head, but he owned a barbershop. So many of those brothers, K.R. Connors is another one. He was a train porter, but he served as Grand Master working on the Santa Fe Railroad, rail line. All of these guys did a lot outside of masonry that it makes you go like, wow, how'd they do it?
Exactly. So if there's one or two things that you want the audience this evening to take away from understanding what the jurisdiction of New Mexico is all about, getting ready to celebrate 100 years in the next 4 months, and where New Mexico is getting ready to go within the next 100 years. What will be like the biggest thing, one or two of the biggest things that you want the audience to take away from understanding about New Mexico this evening?
I think the biggest thing, and if anybody's ever been in this jurisdiction, we're not a large jurisdiction. We have a total of 7 lodges throughout this entire state. We're not a big jurisdiction, but what I want you to take from us is size doesn't matter. The impact you make. One of the things I can say, and if there is somebody, throw it in the chat and let me know. As small of a jurisdiction that we are, I would like to say that we are probably the only jurisdiction that gives away a 4-year scholarship to a graduating high school senior every 2 years. And that's something that I would like to toot our horn for, because we're small, but we get it done. We get it done within the lodge and outside of the lodge. And if you have just a handful of like-minded individuals that really want to get it done, that's all it takes. It doesn't take hundreds and thousands to complete a task or a project. So I would like to say, take us as an example of you don't need a lot to do a lot.
That's all right. Dave?
Yeah, man. I mean, to me, this whole thing is be amazing. And I'll give you a couple comments, then we'll get into the viewer questions. Most of you all seen the video I did yesterday on Past Master Caesar Slade, and it's just so amazing how the connections that come from New Mexico, such as when Terry Military Lodge was there in 1922, when Caesar Slade was now worship master of the lodge. They also had 2 other members, Lafayette Vontress, who later became chaplain when they transferred to Fort Benning, and Armistead Foster, who was also stationed in Mexico. They both came to this area and became very active. Armistead Foster admitted to my lodge, and we still have the demit paperwork. He also served as the charter assistant Ray-Ban of Alfred Temple 145. So these men came from New Mexico, came here, set up shop here, and helped establish bodies here. So that's always a great connection. And before we get into the audience questions, just one other thing: if you're out there researching, never stop researching whatever topic that you have. You will find something very interesting.
Yes.
Just like you all saw it just yesterday. Even though I knew who Caesar Slade was, just did the video on him. Came home, found out more information, which is amazing. He had an older brother named Bishop Slade, who was in Pennsylvania. Bishop Slade, I think he was married twice. I think at least twice. His second wife happened to be past imperial potentate Caesar Blake's widow. So just let that sink in. Think about how legendary past imperial potentate Caesar Blake was. He dies very young. His wife remarries, and she remarries past master Caesar Slade's brother. So that was amazing find. Then to look up, and I believe that Caesar Blake III is still living. I think he's living maybe in the Michigan area. So this it's just amazing. Never stop researching. So we're gonna get into our first question, and this comes from Sister Christine Hackett from California. Says I wasn't able to read the screen shared with the roster of lodges, but I'm interested in knowing if Frank Boyer was made a Mason in that Roswell Lodge, or was he a Mason prior to moving west?
Sister Christine, that is a never-ending task that I am on to see if not only Frank, but TBJ Barclay as well, just because both traveled so much across so many different states. My honest guesstimation, I would probably think TBJ may have been made a Mason somewhere else just because he traveled so much and spent time in so many places. Frank Boyer, I'm going to say maybe yes. And reason being, Dave and myself both, he was from Pelham, Georgia. Nobody has more information on Georgia than, Dave. So we have searched the records and archives endlessly, and he has come up with nothing of him being made a Master Mason in the state of Georgia. And the only other place he was prior to that would be Florida. So, Brother Urso, calling on you, look through those archives and see if you got Frank Boyer on any of your rolls, in Florida. But given what I am doing, I think I'll be getting with Brother Black and trying to go through some of the documents, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, to seeing if, in fact, that lodge in Roswell, Rector number 277, is where he was raised Master Mason. And given so many of his family members that were there, it would be, to me, a high possibility. Because there was, I want to say, 3 of his family members that are also on the rolls of that Rector Lodge 277.
All right, awesome. All right, got another question from Sister Penny Brown, I believe from the great state of California as well. So does this is in regards to the compact? So that means does that mean that the states that don't recognize PHA as a Grand Lodge of state in their respective jurisdictions have to recognize New Mexico PHA?
No, that basically meant that verbiage that was written in there means that the Grand Lodge of State in New Mexico will recognize anybody that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Mexico recognizes. So if we, perfect example, Alabama, we have no amity with the Prince Hall and State brothers there. But because there's no amity between those two, if a Prince Hall brother from Alabama were to come to New Mexico, he would be able to visit a Grand Lodge of State Lodge because they recognize anybody that we do, if that made any sense for you.
Yeah, and that's something I can definitely attest to. A couple of years ago, I reached out to the Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge in New Mexico. This is something probably around like 2014 or 2013. And he attested to that any Grand Lodge that's recognized by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Mexico is recognized by them. Mm-hmm. If there was no further action that anybody need to do, that's how it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we have a couple more questions. Um, I am trying to scroll through the comment list, and thank you all for the comments, tuning in. Definitely appreciate everything that you've done.
There are two, Dave. If you can't put them up on the screen, I can just read them out. That's one right there.
Yeah, I got it. This, from Brother Raymond. He says, "Congrats on 100 years. Being only 100 years old, does the most virtual Prince Hall Grand Lodge in New Mexico have a full complement of York Rite bodies, or does another jurisdiction, York Rite, operate in New Mexico?"
No, we are. I am actually the Grand Secretary for Holy Royal Arch Masons here in New Mexico. We have all bodies but one. We do not have the Purple House, but everything else on left and right, there is a body here in New Mexico that falls under the New Mexico jurisdiction.
All right. It had another one from Sister Christine Hackett. Said, "Do you know past Grandmaster Barclay had any questionable activities that may have prompted the AME Church to erase his participation?"
No. He wasn't. I'm able to follow him all through AME history. I followed him and gathered more AME history than I did Masonic history. I just truly believe the brother didn't take pictures. I have one picture of a group of church members and the ministers from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Now he's in this picture. I just don't know which one he is because I don't have anything else to compare it to, but it's clearly listed in the article. Reverend T.B.J. Barclay and the congregation of this new AME church that was opening up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, but it doesn't point out who he is in the picture. So I keep that picture because one day I'm going to find a picture that I'm going to be able to go, all right, these two faces in the same picture. I got him, but right now he wasn't erased from the AME church. He died as a AME minister, as an AME minister.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Brother or Past Master Bird. Are there any plans to open more lodges in your jurisdiction soon?
That's not something that you just plan to do. That's just something that happens. We are a big governmental state. Most of our lodges are going to be in and around somewhere within a military base, within 50 miles of a military base or less. New Mexico does not have a high African American populace here. We actually only make up about 4% of the state in a whole. But like anywhere else, I'm quite sure if the opportunity arises, we're not going to say you can't open a lodge. It just happens. We're not planning it.
All right, thank you for
Understood.
that.
Hold real quick. Just wanted to let you know, right words for Johnson, that that Suge, Stan Brooks said that since you don't have a royal in select in your jurisdiction, to call him up and he'll make it happen.
Yeah, he told me. He done told me about it already.
Yeah.
I think we have. I think it's one last question. If you could explain how the four corners and how it operates.
So, just like anything else, you have jurisdictions that kind of compile together. For us, of course, at one point in time prior to all of the other Grand Lodges happening, all of the lodges that were in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, all were lodges underneath Colorado. And as everything started to formulate their own grand lodges, quite naturally, if you've done any type of history and you looked at the four corners outside of Masonry, okay, that is the intersection where they say you can be in four states at one time. I can put a hand in this state, a hand in this state, a foot in this state, and a foot in this state. The points of those four states, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, they all meet at a perfectly dang near right angle, square coming between them. So that's where the Four Corners name came from. And we have a annual session here called the Four Corners Conference of Grand Masters, Grand Worthy Matrons, and Grand Patrons as well. At the Conference of Grand Masters, that's a district that's there. And the Four Corners is consisting of Colorado, which still corners Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. And you have New Mexico. Then you have Arizona and also Nevada. Nevada is the final piece to that four corner connection that's there.
All right. Thank you for that, Brother Tim. It looks like that's going to be the last question we have. Brother Jack, did you see any more questions?
No, that was it.
All right. So we can go ahead and look at proceeding to close. And we'll start with Right Worshipful Timothy Johnson for your parting comments.
I'd just like to say it was an honor and a pleasure to be on here with you guys. I made it to the big leagues. To be on here, be able to share our history here in New Mexico. And one of the things I would like to say for you young researchers and even you old researchers, one of the things I can say about this this cast and this board here on Prince Hall Think Tank, at no point in time have I not been able to reach out and glean information or get assistance. Some of us have actually met in person. Brother Gillarm, as I take my annual trips with the kids each year, I called him up and said, hey, I'm going to be down in Atlanta. I'd like the kids to come by and, you know, see the Grand Lodge. And he drove from Alabama over to Atlanta, opened up the lodge, you know, just everything about what we say we are to do as brothers and sisters. You know, if it's within my cable toe, I'm going to be able to do it for you. And I'd like to thank you guys for always being there. As Brother Jack was saying, I'd be throwing questions at him at dark 30 in the morning, you know, while he's at work. Brother Morgan, him and I have talked. We've actually met in person. So this cast here, a lot of the things you don't see off the screen, let me tell you, these guys are stand-up brothers and what true Masonry is about in their fellowship outside of this show. So thank you guys for having me. It was an honor and a pleasure.
All right. Thank you for that, sir. Brother Damian Jack.
Yes, sir. As always, another great show. Thank you, Right Worshipful Johnson, for your outstanding presentation and knowledge on the jurisdiction of New Mexico. I know there was a lot that I learned this evening, not knowing too much, so I was basically a sponge this evening. So thank you for everything. As always, thank you for the late night talks that we have, our back and forth. They're always insightful. You always come up with some great questions that make me think and keep me up at night. So I definitely appreciate you. Thank you to all who took the time to join the show this evening. Again, you could be doing anything else, but you know, as we learned about charity, the most important thing that you can give is your time, because time is something that you cannot get back. So thank you for your time. And I do want to take this time to since we have Past Master Bird on. He is an avid watcher and New York Knicks hater. I do want to take this time to congratulate him and congratulate the Sovereign Grand Inspector General Frederick Dobson class of 2020 and the Sovereign Grand Inspector General Charles Hales class of 2021, the newly elevated Grand Inspectors General of the United Supreme Council of the Northern Jurisdiction. Congratulations to you all for being elevated this weekend. A definite honor. So congratulations to you all. Until next month, thank you again, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Appreciate that, brother Jack. I almost just muted your mic. I
said New York Knicks hater. I was helping you out tonight.
Oh man, it's always good that we can all throughout every show we can always laugh, have a good time. It's never tense on the show. It's always relaxing, and we try to keep that atmosphere going. But thank you to Right West for Tim for accepting the invite to be on the show. Your expertise in masonry in New Mexico is extensive. Over the years, anytime I've called, you had a question, so I'm like, you always been right there, and I try to return the same favor. So just thank you for being you. We hope that you all enjoyed tonight's show. Hope you gained something out of it. Things that were seen to be pretty important is how the amount of military lodges that New Mexico had and their influence. It also showed that there seems to be a romanticized view that Prince Hall Grand Lodges have always gotten along, and you can see from this episode that hasn't always been the case. But it does show that that peace and harmony still did prevail in the end. So that was, to me, that was a good thing to take away. As always, hope you look forward to seeing you on our next show. Continue to keep Brother Caffey and Brother Morgan in your thoughts. They're still distraught over the game earlier. Hey, but we got Game 5 in Madison Square Garden. So we're gonna pull that one out. But as always, look forward to next month.
Here's a quick question before we do go. If they're so distraught, how come you're still here?
Sometimes you have to have that intestinal fortitude just to keep going, keep pushing. That's what it is. And see, I was hurt. I went down to a knee earlier. I was like, man, I don't know if I can do this. But something said it was that voice. It was that voice of Patrick Ewing and Charles Oakley right here. And they said, hey, you gotta hold the flag up. We need you to keep going. So I just pushed through. That's what did it, man.
So you pulled a Willis Reed. That's what you're saying?
That's what it is. I was limping and everything.
Mind you, I must bring this up just because y'all brought it off, and hopefully I don't jinx us. But mind you, we had no technical difficulties this show.
None. No technical difficulties.
After live.
Right, and I think James Morgan is really the problem. Don't tell him I said that. But I think that's him. He's the issue. But as always, look forward to seeing you all next month, and hope you all have a safe holiday. See you all later.
Good night.